Hello boys and girls. Today Annie Kent's going to read you Mr. Rush by Roger Hargreaves. Mr. Rush by Roger Hargreaves. Mr. Rush was the fastest thing on two legs. He used to rush hither and thither and thither and hither and back again all of the time. And, of course, he was always in such a rush that he'd never ever finish anything properly. There's Mr. Rush rushing around. Whoa! One morning he woke up with a jump. He'd only had time for 3 hours sleep because he'd been rushing about for so long the day before. "Oh dear," he cried, leaping out of bed. "I'm late." There's Mr. Rush in bed. And he rushed into his bathroom and washed, not very well as he was in such a hurry, and cleaned one tooth and rushed downstairs 3 at a time. There he is, rushing down the stairs 3 at a time. Mr. Rush had boiled an egg and a toast and a cup of tea had a boiled egg and toast and a cup of tea for breakfast. He boiled the egg for 5 seconds and it tasted awful, not surprising. He toasted the bread for 1 second and it wasn't so it wasn't brown at all. What's the point? That's just warm bread. And as he couldn't bear to wait for the kettle to boil, he made his tea with cold water. Ugh, what a horrid breakfast. And, of course, he was in such a rush, he only ate half of it. Rush, rush, rush. Silly fella. So there's him sitting down for his breakfast. His egg's super runny, his bread's not warm, his bread's not toasted, and his tea is cold. What a miserable breakfast. After his half a breakfast, he rushed off again. Out of his front door, leaving it open, down his garden path, out of his garden gate, leaving it open too, and off down the lane. There's Mr. Rush, rushing. He passed Mr. Happy. "Hello," called Mr. Happy. "Good morning, Mr. Rush. Where are you off to?" "Can't stop," cried Mr. Rush. "I'm in too much of a hurry." "I can see that," thought Mr. Happy to himself as he watched Mr. Rush disappear into the distance. "I wonder where he's going." Where Mr. Rush was going was nowhere. Fast, as usual. There's Mr. Happy trying to call out for him. Mr. Rush rushed all around all morning and then rushed home and had a quick bite to eat, a sandwich without bread, and then rushed off again and rushed around all afternoon. There's Mr. Rush rushing. Oh, look at him go. Gosh. Starts here. So much rushing, Mr. Rush. That evening he was reading a magazine. He never had time to read a book when he saw an advertisement for a holiday. "Ooh," he said, "I'd like that. Haven't had a holiday for ages." But then his face fell. "I can't go on holiday," he thought, "because I don't have any money." And then he thought again, and his face rose. "I know," he thought, "I'll get a job." There's Mr. Rush reading the magazine, thinking about himself getting a job. And so the following morning he rushed off and got a job with a farmer milking cows. There's the farmer, there's the bucket for the milk, and there's Mr. Rush. But of course there wasn't any good in that, because if there's one thing a cow can't stand, it's being rushed, especially when it's being milked. So Mr. Rush rushed off and got himself another job, driving a bus. There's Mr. Rush driving the bus. But of course he wasn't any good at that, because he was always in such a rush he'd never stop at any of the bus stops. And if there's one thing people waiting at a bus stop don't like, it's when the bus doesn't stop for them. There's the people, and the bus must have driven past them. I think we know who those people are, don't we? Mr. Nosy, Mr. Small, and Mr. Funny. So Mr. Rush rushed off and got himself another job as a waiter in a hotel. There's Mr. Rush looking all fancy in his waiter clothes. But of course he wasn't any good at that, because no sooner had he served people a meal and they'd taken one bite that he whisked the plate away from under their noses. And if there's one thing hungry people can't stand, it's having food whisked away from them. Oh, I'd hate having my food taken away from me. Poor Mr. Rush. No job, no money. Oh dear, he sighed to himself. I'm never going to be able to go on holiday. He looked very glum and gloomy. But then an idea struck him. An idea for a job for someone who rushes around all of the time. An ideal job for someone who was the fastest thing on two legs. Do you know what that job was? I don't know what that job is. Would you like to know what that job was? I bet you would. Only Katie's going to turn the page in just a second. Postman, delivering express letters. Mr. Rush was so good at it, he delivered twice as many letters in half the time any postman had ever done it before. So he saved enough money for that holiday of his. Oh, wow, he gets to go on holidays because he's worked hard and saved his money. And so the very next week, there was Mr. Rush sitting on a beach in the hot sunshine under a palm tree on holiday. This is the life, he grinned and rushed off for a swim. There he is on the beach looking cool with his sunglasses, his drink, and he's beached out under the palm tree with the sunshine. His 15th swim that day. And then it was breakfast time. Oh, Mr. Rush is still rushing on holidays. Mr. Rush by Roger Hargreaves.